Welcome back to another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This is episode number 31. And this week we are reviewing, it's a little bit of a change of pace. It's a very old film from 1943. It's called María Candelaria. This is one of the films that was part of the golden generation of Mexican cinema, for those of you who don't know. And so this was... I don't know. I found it to be like a very interesting film, and there's going to be a lot to talk about since we have some, I guess, personal connections to some of the themes within the film. And this movie was directed by Emilio Fernandez and stars Dolores del Rio y Pedro Armendáriz. So, Chris, I just kind of wanted, before we sort of get into it, I kind of wanted to get your initial thoughts. What did you think? Because this is definitely a different type of film than we've reviewed in the last 30 episodes.
Yeah, I think it's mainly different just because of the style. Like, I think if you watch like any movies in the 30s or 40s, even Hollywood has a higher, they would have a higher production value. You can tell it's a slower paced movie. Mm-hmm. They really the focus on like in this era, I guess, because I've seen some 50s films too, and some other 40s films that, the focus is really like just on like, it's almost like a play, but like in a film setting, because we don't have special effects yet. We don't have like maybe the robust script writing that we have now, where it's a lot of lines. But I think that's why this movie is like perfect for its time, because I think in many ways the simplified story, I give a lot of like credit where like a simplified story, because the plot point is not that complicated, but you can get a lot. Like, I mean, there's a lot of scenes where it's like
it was very layered, and it like there's a lot underneath kind of each scene.
Yeah, and I will say that, like, I guess another disclaimer is that I think to really get a lot out of this film, you kind of have to pick up on that, because if you just watch the film as like, let's say I was like, let's say I'm Danish, and I just watched the movie for its plot and like what I see, you're not really gonna pick up on all the little details or nuances. So it's like, I can see how they would watch them and be like, oh well, I guess it's, it won an award, but it's okay. But I got a lot out of this movie watching it, and I was just like, it really clicked in my brain at times where I was like, wow, like things have changed, but some things haven't. And I'm like,
yeah, a lot has stayed the same. I mean, culturally.
And we'll get into we'll get into that, like, obviously, as we talk about the film more in detail. But I did enjoy the movie a lot, and I think I enjoyed it more than I thought, even though the beginning was slow. But I think after like minute like 40 or 35, I was just like, I had to finish it, and like I know I finished it before you did. So
yeah, I finished it last night, but it was good. I was watching it, and to add to your point of it, sort of feeling as if it were a play. There were definitely, and I guess I'm not sure if this was, I haven't watched a ton of movies in the golden age of Mexican cinema, but I did note at many different points it was just cut to black screen and then switch scenes, which you really don't see in films today, by and large. So yeah, it was interesting that you sort of picked up on that too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, if you're not like, if you don't have like, it's like I don't want to say it's like wine. It's like wine, I guess. If you have to acquire that taste, where you have to be a bit patient, because yes, it's just films were made differently back then, right? Like, it was not just different technology, but the techniques and practices that we see today weren't as refined, right? Like now, like a movie like this, there are movies with simplified stories, but you could, like you said, you can tell with the editing and the script writing that it's tighter. I bet this script was pretty light, and like it wasn't like as heavy as some of these blockbuster or these movies that win awards now, that you can tell that maybe have a lot of like dialogue or a lot of like, like you said, like paragraphs setting the scene and explaining things. Like, I think this was, I haven't read the script, but I imagine that it was not like, over elaborated. I think it was like they had a thought of what they wanted to do, and they went with it. Or the director, Emilio.
So you want to hear a fun fact that I heard about this film, or when doing a little more research, was that the original plot of this film was actually written on 13 napkins when the director was sitting in a restaurant.
So thank you for sharing that, because it confirmed what I suspected.
Yeah.
This movie comes from more of like the soul, I think, and I think that's why it resonated probably strongly, especially I bet at the time with Mexican society. So.
Yeah, definitely. So it was interesting. I guess so. This film is set. I'm trying to figure out where I want to start. This film is set before the Mexican Revolution. So for those of you who don't know, it's a very big deal in Mexican history, where basically throughout the history of Mexico, the Catholic Church had a very large control on society. Mexico is a very religious country by and large. Most people adhere to Catholicism, and because of that, there tends to be a lot of I'm trying to wait. I want to make sure I'm not getting my things confused. The Mexican Revolution happened to do with essentially between the state and the state of Mexico and the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church had at the time, owned a lot of land in Mexico, and there were a lot of people that resented, but were still for the church. And in this film, since it's before the revolution, you see a lot of I would say the religious fervor that really a lot of people had in the society. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, Chris.
Maybe a little disclaimer to defend you. That was an oversimplification of the Mexican.
Very oversimplification. If you want to chime in, you can go ahead. Because I was trying to figure out, do we go very deep into it or not?
I'm not an expert myself.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of stuff.
Way oversimplification. But I want to give some context. Really, it has two sides.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just add in just a little other high level details that there was also it was mixed with a lot of social issues, so class. So
tons.
Landowners kind of maybe sometimes manipulating the situation. I mean, it was a
lot, but no. So at one point, from what I've read, is the church owned about 2/3 of the land in Mexico. They're very much tied to the wealthy class, and because of that, there was a lot of classism, as well as sort of questioning, should the church hold this much really power over society there? And it's the church still does, but it was even worse pre the Mexican Revolution. And so that's really what the fight was about. So it was interesting because you see the dynamic and really how the church was the center of society back then. It still is today, but it was really, anytime anyone had an issue, in the film, they would go to the priest. And I think we can both relate, since we've had family who is from Mexico. We can relate to having relatives who've certainly done that.
I mean, just another disclaimer on my part. I mean, I have ancestors that actually fought with Pancho Villa. I mean, this is it's because part of my ancestry comes from more of the lower middle class of Mexico, and it was and people forget also 1910 when that was, I think it kind of started. It was also election year. There was a lot of, most people agree historically that it was rigged. And it was in many ways a lot of the issues back then still persist. But yes, your point is this film is right before that let's say.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to give that context because they give a very rosy picture of the Catholic Church, and I think they did that based on the sort of the timing of when the filming was supposed to be set.
Yes, I also think that they do that because we can get into why they portray the Catholic Church too, because I think even in 1940s, even though there was issues with it
was still very
people still revere your local priests and obviously the Virgin Mary, which we'll get into.
Man. Just to add to that, even when I went down to my on my dad's side, that side of my family's from Mexico, and every time we'd go down to visit, they'd always be we had to go to this one town it was in Jalisco. And it was sort of the religious center. It's kind of oh no, if you're going to be in Mexico, in our hometown, we got to go basically make the pilgrimage over there, because that's where the big church was. So it's very religious. Even today, there's still a pretty big religious stronghold there in many of these towns.
Yes. And actually probably one of the reasons that if you if you're from the West, they're in the West too, but if you're from let's say Europe or Canada,
old cultures,
and you go there and you see why maybe gay rights is such a hard thing, or even abortion, is because there's still a very strong social conservative culture in Mexico, especially if you go to the rural areas.
Absolutely, not necessarily in Mexico City, I would say.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's probably one of the. You would still say they're probably more conservative.
It's less, but it's far less conservative than the outlying areas.
Exactly. The one thing I was going to say about the context is that what I found interesting is that this film is, like you said, set a little bit before. I think it's 1908. It's supposed to be set around, or I forgot what year, but a little bit before the Mexican Revolution. And you see a society where I think what they were trying to portray is that you can see what was simmering. right? That's what I like about the
Yeah,
film.
yeah, yeah. That's a
Like,
good. I guess
and
that's how I was like trying to like build it up to. Yeah,
you
there's a
can
lot of
see what,
simmering there.
yeah, like you see that there's this tension between race, class, and why it would explode later.
Hmm.
And again, like I said, like you're only gonna
It's a
get
good
that
point.
if you know like a little about the context. Like if I'm just a new person watching this movie and I don't know anything, I'm just gonna think it's a movie, spoiler alert, that is just about like discrimination and
In many ways, actually, what this kind of reminds me of goes back to another film that we sort of covered was really with Do the Right Thing, where you could see the build up, the tension, all that. Now that was more in your face, and this is more subtle.
yes, this is
But it still had that same vibe.
yeah, because with Spike Lee's movie, I felt like what he was trying to do was like
Oh, it was
use the neighborhood as a cauldron, right? But in
yeah,
this film, it's more like this is like
it's a setting.
it's like yeah, it's like the time period because this is obviously made after, and that generation knows what happened, right? I mean, there was a conflict, there was a
Much closer connection to it.
I mean, I will tell you this: I like my older relatives say, like, unfortunately, for what they started with, it seems like a failed revolution because that's how
Yeah.
it played out. It didn't play out the way they thought. But I still think history is history. In the moment, I don't blame them. But the point is, I was really trying to make is that yes, like it's like I wouldn't it's just say it's a setting, but you can tell it's a more of a big like it's trying to get to a deeper like societal issue. I think with Do the Right Thing, it was trying to take some societal issues but apply it to a neighborhood where I think this is like you can tell like there's some truths here they're trying to say about the society that
100%.
haven't been resolved yet. And this is the
Yeah.
1940s, so that's what I thought was like crazy is that like they're taking a reflective look, and I just imagine now you can still do another.
Oh, you could still do it, dude.
Yeah.
Pretty, and it would still be very relevant, I would say. But I wanted to get your opinions. What did you think about the painter, by the way, since you're first introduced to him in the movie?
Yes, in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I don't know. I wanted to jump into like the cultural stuff, but it's
Okay. All
okay.
right. Well,
No, I'll answer your question. So I'm
I
gonna
think it'll weave in because he's an outsider, so
yeah,
you might find
yeah,
might
so
be a good segue.
with the painter, and this is why maybe if I was like somebody else, I'd have a different perspective. Honestly, I didn't like his character, but I'm biased. I mean, I'm straight up gonna shoot from the hip.
You're gonna rip him all these avant-garde painters.
And not just that, but like it was very clear. Like okay, I'm gonna jump to a little bit towards the end, right? He has that line that really stuck with me. That he's like, "This is why the indigenous never like make it because like they don't know how to work in the modern world, right?" He basically,
yeah, when he said that, I was like, wow.
I was about to punch my screen. Anyways, because this is so for context. In many ways, I feel like this is what Americans to some degree, but definitely Europeans, especially Spaniards, how they view Mexico, Latin America is like,
well, how they viewed, especially the indigenous there.
especially the indigenous too. But I think even like the mestizos, the mixed race, that's mixed race for everybody. Look it up if you've heard the term. I'm just saying that for our listeners. You could tell that they have this like they're snobby about it, right? They don't. They basically look at these people as if like, oh, they're just uncultured barbarians in many ways, and a huge issue. I mean,
it was border like way back when there was like discussions from the church because from the settlers from way back then the conquistadors, they were kind of debating if they would even consider these people like
yeah.
that's to the extreme it went.
And the reason I wanted to raise how you can argue things haven't like changed is because I think that line is also very important because I think it also shows how deep down maybe in Mexican society they view the indigenous, right? Because if you watched Roma, like I mean,
I haven't seen Roma to
well,
preface that, so I gotta check it out at some point.
Well, for the listeners, if you have seen Roma, which I imagine many did, because that was the most popular Mexican movie I think recently. That movie centered around the story of an indigenous worker, basically like maid, and you see that like, and she's in more of a modern setting. I would say like I think that movie's supposed to take place in like the 60s. So you see even then that like how they're viewed is definitely as a different social class. Like in America, we often talk about like the history of slavery and immigration groups. In Mexico, often maybe the undiscussed truth is like how how like the indigenous are looked upon, or how they integrated with society. And there's a mix of the local history, like the people who were already there, the Spanish who imposed basically their own elitism, and then how that like was never like that morphed into its own pot. Like it's a very like what I hope what people will get out of this if they do listen is like Mexican history is very complicated. It is not as simplified
very complicated
as we're told here in America.
But I guess to give more context. I mean, it's pretty sad because, well, in Mexico they have a very large indigenous population, tend to be heavily, especially concentrated more in like the southern states, that being like Oaxaca, Guerrero, Chiapas. There's more, and there's obviously like other indigenous groups in the north, but that's just where the most heavy concentration, I would say, is. And I guess to juxtapose that to like our situation here, it's like, unfortunately, based on history, the Mexico was settled by the Spaniards, and here in the U.S., ultimately, we were settled by the British, and how the two dealt with their indigenous populations was a little different. Here, we sort of pushed ours, and was essentially genocide, and you just have little pockets. So we don't really deal with, very tragically so, we don't really deal with the indigenous peoples that are still here in the U.S. Very frequently, right? Most of them are on reservations where it's, oh God, it's so sad because the government basically said, you get your own little pockets of land. We don't really want to deal with you at large. If you want to see a great movie that sort of talks about indigenous sort of issues, I would highly recommend. I think you would agree, Chris. Wind River.
Yeah, Wind River is good.
But anyway, so that's why I was sort of putting those differences, because over in Mexican society, their population at large is just a way higher percentage of indigenous peoples. But unfortunately, yeah, they still are very segregated from certain parts of society.
Yes. No, I agree. It's the truth. That's like
it is, yeah. I mean, that's no part. I mean, it's kind of sad because, yeah, a lot of these issues aren't really known here in the U.S. or don't really get talked about because, sort of the viewpoint from a lot of people that I've dealt with is like, there's just Mexico. There's like, no, people don't really understand sort of the underlying differences within the groups of people, like from what state you are, or like, whether you're more like your family has more European descent, or if you're more indigenous descent. Like there's very different standings within society there.
Exactly. And I know we were talking about the painter and his kind of like outsider European. I think he's actually from Spain, right? Like that's his character.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
I can look.
And then he wants to take an outsider's look and just paint, like find his beauty. Like I don't know. Sometimes these avant-garde people just like annoy me, especially with him, because he doesn't really understand sort of like the culture there. He, if you will, he just kind of does whatever he wants, and he sees like this indigenous woman. He's like, I must paint you. He's like, to like capture the beauty of like the area, and then he like, yeah. Anyway, we can get on with that after.
So, but what I will say is, so actually, I think the painter is based on his character is based on like Mexican artists during that time period too.
Mm-hmm.
So he might not be from Spain, but I think what he represents, and this is why again you only get this if you kind of know the history or the culture, is I think he represents kind of like the part of the Mexican elite who always look down on the indigenous.
Oh, of course, he must have been from Mexico City.
But yeah, you're the Mexican elite. Like even today in the DFA, like the same thing. Like there's a lot of issues in Mexico, but they somehow can travel to places and go to the World Cup games, no problem. No matter like what's going on in the country. Okay, I'm not trying to go off on a rant here, but I wanted to go back to our.
Well, you could, man. I mean, you're talking about the aspect of society there. Like, what was that show that we watched? Sorry, we're going off on tangents because there's just a lot to sort of unpack and a lot that you can talk about. But what was it? There's a show on Netflix, I believe, Casa De Flores.
Yeah, I didn't finish like the recent seasons. I
didn't either, but that
season one
talk about that tends to give a little bit of context as to like some of the cultural nuances within the family dynamics of Mexico, as well as show you sort of some of the elites there as well.
Yeah, once the one of the main actresses didn't return, it kind of like got off my list.
Right.
I think the first two seasons are good. I might eventually finish it. Just no time. But anyways, I wanted to get back to our main heroine. So, Maria
Maria
Candelaria,
Candelaria.
yeah, she represents. So her character is very important. Like obviously, the movie's titled
Mhm.
after, because again, what we're just talking about, all the issues with social class, the indigenous, her character represents very well, right? She's not wealthy. She is from I don't think they ever specify mixed blood, but it's kind of implied, maybe, or at least she's from the
You don't
like
know. You do know her mother essentially was a prostitute, though.
exactly. So, which again, we'll get into that about generational sins,
Yes.
um, but her character is like very a symbol of like what we're just kind of like really rushed through, like, and that's why like again, I give this movie a lot of credit because like you have to like it's well written even though if it was on a napkin, because her character throughout the film, even with her lines and her situations, you see that like she herself is trying to be like a good person, right? A person of
Mhm.
character.
She's conservative, has ethics, right?
Exactly.
And unfortunately, the town society at large doesn't care.
Exactly. The town, and also like even like at times like the priest does his best, but okay, we'll get into that later. But it's still like a lot of just moral support through words. But yeah, she's trying her best to like they have a little farm, I believe, right? And she's
Hmm.
also married to what's his name,
Uh,
Lupe, right? No, not Lupe.
no, it's
Uh,
Diego. No, Luis Alfonso. Oh, Lorenzo Rafael.
yeah, Lorenzo. So this guy also is also kind of like same social class, and he also represents like what I like to say is like a naive noble person, because he tries to always also do like the right thing within like the constraints he has, right? Like we'll get into this plot point where they accuse him of stealing, but he really just needed to take this medicine for Maria. But yeah, they represent this kind of like naivete, this purity, right?
Hmm.
And
About doing
around
the right thing. If you do the right thing, like good things will happen to you. That's kind of
yes,
like the gist that I got of their
but yes,
characters.
because of their, let's say social class, and like we just mentioned with the indigenous, and also her heritage of the sin of her mother, they're subjected to basically a lot of social persecution, basically.
Yeah, I mean they're constrained and confined. They're isolated from society.
Exactly, because the town, anything that happens that's bad is their fault, right? And they project this evil onto them because they're the ones that are not like us, right? They're not the normal people. Um,
Hmm. Oh,
and
by the way, to add to your point, though, before when you were talking about the character who's the painter, yeah, apparently his character was based on Diego Rivera, so that makes so much sense.
yeah, so I might
Famous
have
Mexican painter.
I might have misspoken around like being a foreigner, but definitely that elite mentality, because people
Hmm.
also think that, because how the American perspective, right? Like, oh, Mexico is just the people who are working the land and stuff. There are very, very, really wealthy Mexican Americans who are probably
Hmm.
live
And there's
better than.
more than just yeah, and there's more than just desert too.
Oh yeah. I mean, I like the stereotype because like it's close to what like my family's from, but like no, there's definitely more than the desert in Mexico. Like Mexico's a huge country.
Oh yeah, with
Yeah.
very vast geographic landscapes. But I guess that so that is definitely another thing that they really wanted to sort of to show, because it is very true. I've been to several parts of Mexico, and it is very gorgeous. I mean, the culture's great, and very lively. Like there's a lot of different sort of uh, I would say good, like just beautiful things about the culture and the just like depending on where you are in Mexico, the cultural diversity is like enormous. Um, but and so I think this film also wanted to show you like within the town, it's like, oh, you're in this beautiful landscape, and yet even though you're in this beauty, it's like these people are subjected to such tough life too. Because I think that was one of the themes, is they really wanted to touch upon the beauty of Mexico.
That's true too. Yeah, good point on the landscape, because yeah, people forget that there's parts of Mexico that are very green, like rivers
Dude, you
and
can
like
go to Puerto Vallarta and Cancun. It's tropical jungles.
exactly, it's completely different, and
Yeah.
that's not how people view it.
No,
Um,
it's
it's like
never
it's
how it's
beach.
portrayed in film. That's how I would say.
It's like you said, it's either Cancun or it's the desert. It's like, okay, come on. Like, yeah, it's like me making a movie. I'm not like, if I wasn't like American. Oh, it's only New York City and
LA, LA, bro. That's it.
And then if I want a more authentic experience, I film in Texas.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Feeling really adventurous, you go to Miami.
Exactly.
You know.
The one thing I wanted to bring up also, something that I thought the movie did very well, and it's storytelling, not telling you, but like letting you pick it up, is like the store owner, right? The guy that accuses Luis of stealing. There's scenes earlier in the movie where he's kind of like basically trying to bed Maria. He basically, like, it's not that explicit because it's not like a modern movie where he's, there's sex scenes, but it's very subtle that he's, or maybe not that subtle. He is like, if he
It's not
could,
subtle.
it's
Yeah.
not subtle. I mean in movie making, right? Like in some movies now, it's so obvious with all.
Oh no! It's not even subtle. They'll just flat out show you.
Yes, but what I like about like that scene, or that little subplot, was that it shows that, like, even though society looks down on like her and stuff, like, again, maybe this doesn't change too much. Where if a guy, like, if she's pretty, it doesn't matter what, if she's
Well,
indigenous.
the dude is also like, yeah. The one thing you have to add is he also comes from like within their town. He is a store owner, so he's part of like the elite like class there in reality, where he tells and he looks down on everybody.
He does. He looks
he can get away with anything he does.
Exactly, and he pursues her because, and I think this
got that power position.
Yeah, and also they did good casting, because even though she is like from this, like, let's say, lower caste, I'm gonna use that term, she is a beauty, and like he, wants to bed that beauty, but obviously he has such a sour personality where she's already like committed to her, like Louise.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to break down is that, like, this is something that
no, Lorenzo's is, I think, who you're referring to.
Lorenzo, yeah, sorry, Lorenzo. But what I wanted to break down was that this is something that still kind of occurs in any society, but especially Mexican society, where, there is still a big macho culture. So, like, if you watch any recent documentaries, women who speak up, like, domestic violence is like obviously a serious topic that's been discussed in America, but in Mexico, people make kind of jokes of the train, or the ads they do of like, don't like just hit your woman, or scream at them and stuff, because it's still, people think like America has a misogynistic culture, but you just have to see how, like, even though, like I said, it's interesting, like you said, because the matriarch is still powerful, but at the same time, there's many instances where women are totally like abused.
No, I would say the matriarchy comes from the grandmother at that point. It's not necessarily from the wives.
Yeah, and there is a history and a culture, unfortunately, of real, like, abuse against women in Mexican culture, which, again, like, I think that movie isn't going that far to say that out loud, but they are insinuating that, like, look, we have a culture of, like, men believe that they can just, if she doesn't have, like you said, they don't have the power, they have the power dynamic, that they can just maybe get away with,
sure,
I'm gonna call it like suspect behavior.
Yeah, I mean, and to add to your point, I mean, since we were just in we've been in quarantine since March, like almost 10 months now, I would say 10, 11 months. But yeah, in Mexico, they had a report that because people were in lockdown there as well, domestic violence incidents were just skyrocketing. I forgot what the exact numbers were, but they were calling it like an epidemic, basically. And so it was pretty tragic.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read this. I think I saw a Vice documentary on this. I'm not really surprised. I mean, it's, again, it's unfortunate, but this was, if you told me back when the lockdowns happened, this would happen, I wouldn't have
been surprised.
Exactly. But this is where I give points to the movie, because, again, this is the 1940s, and it's sad that maybe things haven't changed, but they are making the right insinuation that, look, this is something that happens in our society, right? What I like about this movie is it's more self-reflective than, like, again, the simplified plot will lead you to believe. Because, again,
very self-reflective, I would say.
Yeah, and so we'll get into, like, the priests, because I have huge thoughts. Because
what did you think about the fiance or the husband to Di Lorenzo? What did you think about his character?
Yeah, I touched upon him a little bit, where I think he also represents that naivete, and, like, he represents. Oh, that's a good question, because I just clicked on my brain. He represents what I think, what Mexican society wants to believe Mexican machismo is, right? Like, good heart, will do the right thing by the woman, will
hardworking.
hardworking defender to the hilt. Unfortunately, there's the flip side, which is the store owner. But yes, he represents, I think, what Mexican society, Mexican people hope to be, right? Like, we can be hardworking, we can be, do the right thing, we can, because he has. There's a lot of scenes where, like, he does the fighting in the jail. He steals for his I don't. Oh, we'll say he stole, but he took the medicine for his soon to be fiance or wife. And so I think those are attributes that I think a lot of, maybe the good side of what machismo could be, right? Like, you're not just going to be a coward and, hide in the bushes because, you don't want to step up and, take action. He's a man of action. You can argue whether all those actions worked out the way he hoped, but he didn't just, stay on the sidelines, which honestly, we've seen a lot of that, before. But it's, his character wasn't. I mean, I understand what his character was there for, but obviously the other characters gave more to the story. But he had his place, and I thought it was like I just said, it was an important character to show at least that side of like some of the stronger, prettier aspects of of what
Of
a person.
machismo, of like being basically a strong character.
Yeah, what a strong male character can be in Mexican society. Yeah, whether he's indigenous or not. Yeah. Right, because he's also faithful. Right? He's not like cheating or anything like that. We know that
he's hardworking. He wants to try to progress, provide for his soon-to-be wife.
Yeah, because
he's like what you would hope, your husband is. That's sort of what he embodies. What did you think about because a lot was centered around taking care of the pig, and I wanted to ask you, I guess, what you thought about that, why do they choose a pig, or why was that such a big focus to you?
I thought about this for a while, and I feel like I'm missing some aspect of a cultural reference.
Yeah.
But the way I viewed it was the pig. So again, people forget that Mexico, there is a lot of agriculture. I mean, I don't know. Again, I talk to people and they just seriously.
Anyway,
yeah. But
we're gonna get off on a tangent of going off about
again, so context, right? The reason the land was so important in Mexico was because it was for the longest time. Maybe you can argue till this day, but let's say definitely in the 19th century, agricultural driven society. I mean,
that's how you made money and you got out of poverty.
I can tell you, I don't want to say, what's the term for stories that are just passed down verbally, whatever. I can say
oral tradition.
Yeah, I can tell you oral stories of my own ancestors that worked the land. They were not part of unfortunately the elite of Mexican society, but and the problem at the time, 120 years ago, is that you work the land and then you're the landowner, or as you said, either the wealthy aristocrat or usually the Catholic Church would just give you whatever scraps they were left, right? And I think the pig, like I said, the pig, again, I think it's important that it's a farm animal. And I also think the reason it was a baby pig is I think what they were it represented the hope of okay, we build a little bit of capital, we can now have a stake in the society, and then we can move up, right? Because that's kind of universal, right? Moving up and getting yourself an established platform where you're not living in fear of shaky ground, right? Something happening and now you have nothing, right? Unfortunately, this pig is killed mercilessly by the store owner.
Yeah.
Because again, I think that represents how in the end, Mexican society can be very brutal and ruthless too.
I guess I think the reason they talk about the pig is the setting is actually sort of outside of Mexico City, or within the area of Mexico City. That's because it's an indigenous town. But for those of you who don't know, pork is that's one of the meats that's very heavily consumed and very popular in Mexico, and specifically in the Mexico City area, that region. And because at one point they were talking about cochinitas, which is a style of preparation for pork. And so I think that's just because that's so commonly consumed, I think that's just why they chose that. Instead of a cow, no, it's more of the pig for that region. I think if you were in a different region of Mexico, they probably would have chosen a cow.
Yeah, but that's a good call out on the pork thing, because I knew I was missing something, but definitely the reason it's an important farm animal is because it's not random. It's one that they will help.
Well, you got to know about the most commonly, or the cuisine of the region, and because Mexico has such a diversity of food, and it varies from region to region. So if you're, it's very fascinating. If you're in the very northern part of Mexico, they tend to, there's certain parts that around Monterrey they eat goat. Like chivo is like a big deal, and then
Okay.
other places it's like beef. On the coast, it's a lot of fish. Around central Mexico, it's more like pork. So it varies depending on where you are.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize for the listeners that again, the land thing it's not trivialized. Like we're emphasizing it for a reason because farmland, land, like
Oh yeah, it's
agriculture,
huge. In my
it's
dad's
very,
hometown, it's all agriculture there.
it's super important. And like again, this is one of one of the seeds of a revolution is because of this discrepancy of how this was the wealth of labor was basically diminished.
Hmm.
But yes, yeah, good call on the pig. Yeah, I figured it was something. I was like like I knew like it was like I know pork's
Yeah,
important, but
if you don't know that much about cochinitas, you should look up like a video on the style of food. I must try one day. I want to go to that area of Mexico. Dude, it looks so good. It's like, sorry, this is a quick side tangent, but specifically in the Yucatan, which Mexico City is not part of the Yucatan, but sort of in that region extends. It kind of like use up. If you want to look at your map in Mexico, there's a city called Merida around that region. They love the solid preparation of cochinitas. And I was watching some quick like food documentary, and they marinate their meat in like basically in the ground under coals for like 48 hours. It was something insane. I was like, I must try this one day.
oh, that sounds
Food's
like
so good.
tasteful meat. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I guess do you want to jump into talking about the role of the priest in this film and like also
Yeah.
maybe
I was kind of leave it up to you because there's a lot of different. I mean, we could talk about the plot, but the plot's very simplistic. It's more interesting talking about the different
yeah, I
characters and
mean
what's going on.
if you want,
I think
if you want for the viewers, we can quickly summarize that plot because like I said, it's like a short
sure.
story.
I'll do it real quick. So essentially, the plot takes place in your. It sort of starts with it's a bunch of apprentices talking to this famous painter in Mexico. And then one of them wants to know about this specific painting that this famous painter had had essentially painted years before. And he's like, no, I don't really want to talk about it. There's like a lot of history in it tragically, like this painting. And then it goes back in time to sort of the story and how it unfolds. And you're introduced to this woman whose name is María Candelaria. And obviously, we already went through some of the dynamics, but like you said, we're pretty sure she's mestizo, which means she's a sort of mix of both indigenous as well as European blood. And so you're introduced to her character, and she represents sort of the purity, and I would also say the beauty of Mexico. I think that's also what her character partly represents as well, right? Because she doesn't really compromise on her ethics. She wants to get married. She always wants to do the right thing. But unfortunately, she suffers from the stigma of the sins of her mother, who happened to be a prostitute. And at that point in very conservative Mexican society, that's just like an absolute no-no. If you're part of that, you're part of like your moral. What's the word I'm looking for? You're part of like the moral decay of society, and so they are not going to deal with you at all. And unfortunately, by extension, even they're not going to deal with the mother, and they're not going to deal with her daughter as well, even though her daughter did nothing wrong. But anyway, so the daughter, you're never introduced to her mother, but the daughter, Maria Candelaria, she's been ostracized from society. Can't really deal with it. She sells flowers, but even the townspeople don't want her selling flowers in the town. So that really puts an economic strain on her because because it's very agricultural based and you can't sell. There's not much you can do, and so this sort of causes a big dynamic that sort of sets off a chain of events because it's also, you're never told this specifically why, but she owes money to the town basically a store owner whose name is Don Damian, and he's a mestizo. He's part of the wealthy class, and she tries paying him with flowers that she grows, but he said, no, I want money. But she's like, I can't sell these flowers in town, so I can't pay you money. I have no way to pay you. And so that puts a big constraint. And additionally, because the store owner also wants to pursue Maria Candelaria, he won't accept any payment of vegetables from her fiance Lorenzo, or her boyfriend. Basically, they're planning on getting married, but you don't know if they're engaged or whatnot. And so basically, they have no way. Either of them have no way to make any money, which ends up being very problematic. And then at one point, when they're trying to sell, I believe they go and sell their basically their flowers and their vegetables somewhere else, and they take a boat ride, and Maria gets bitten by a mosquito, and unfortunately she contracts malaria. Now, the other thing that's sort of messed up is that all the doctors, the government officials, they allow the mestizo, elite working class or elite store owner, Don Damian, to sell a malaria. So he has all the medication, and he refuses to give it to this couple. And so then one night, essentially what happens is the soon-to-be husband, Lorenzo, goes and breaks into the hospital and steals some of the medicine, the quinine, as well as a wedding dress. But he gets caught later on, but Maria, so what ends up happening is Maria recovers, and they're about to get married, but then the store owner realizes it was him who broke in, has him arrested, and he's jailed. And then to try to pay off the debts, that original painter from the beginning offers to bail out her boyfriend if she will agree to be painted. And so she poses, but then this painter asks her to pose nude, which she's like, no. She's like, I'm not compromising my ethics. I'm not going to pose nude for you, and runs out. But what ends up happening is by that point, he had already painted her face, but he hadn't painted the rest of her body. So one of the other proteges says, my physique is similar to hers, so don't worry, you can just paint my body as if it were hers. And then so he paints a nude portrait that appears, if you don't know, to be Maria Candelaria, even though it's only her face and the body of another woman. Well, all the townspeople see this portrait, and they're horrified because a nude painting is just very blasphemous. And they see this, and they recognize it's Maria Candelaria, and so they go, and then a mob forms. And they chase her, and they chase her over to the prison where her would-be husband is, her fiance, and they stone her to death. And I guess the thing that I didn't like is it doesn't quite explain to you how he got out of jail, but he breaks out of jail and he carries her dead body out.
No, how they explain is that you saw the scene where he's able to break the door open.
Yeah.
I gotta dock a little bit for that, man.
Yeah, that one I did not like.
You can't get out the whole time, but now suddenly you get this
He's Superman, man.
Your woman's in danger. It's that says a little bit about Mexican society, but also that's not realistic.
Well, that's the elevated machismo element if you want that type of masculinity to prevail.
Exactly. Suddenly turned into Super Saiyan and blew the door. Seriously,
he blew it. It was like an explosion.
I was like, oh, okay. I don't think you were that
Super Saiyan. I love that. No, you can. That was the one point. That was my biggest issue with the film. I was like, come on. I know special effects have come a long way, but I was like, that just doesn't make sense. You should have had one of the guards be empathetic or something like that.
Or oh, you got to save her. Let's go. No, it was he. And then he fought all the guards too. I was like, well, aren't these trained?
Oh yeah. He's like, oh no. Oh yeah, you're gonna come up top super slow, slow motion. I'm gonna hit you from the left.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it's basically like I said,
it's fairly simple, right? It's
I feel you could read a short story and you could be like, that's the plot, right? It's
absolutely. But it was interesting. If you want, so that's a basic summary. Oh, and throughout this, there's a few points that we sort of missed. I was trying to just basically recap. Oh, before we get to the priest, the other part that I loved was that when the main character Maria is sick, essentially her husband steals the medicine, gives it to her, and then a doctor comes. And the doctor's like I'm here to check on her. And he's like, how are you gonna pay? And he's like, oh, the painter sent me. So he's checking, and then guess who comes in is sort of the town, I would say like shaman, because she comes from like the old indigenous like medicines, and she goes and and like she has that, as well as like she's kind of like the shaman, but she's also very religious, and so she doesn't trust this science man too, and so they get into a bit of beef. It was just hilarious because I was like, oh yeah, I could so relate to that because I remember my abuelita when I was a kid. She'd have like all of her medicines. I remember and this is before like weed was legal in California, but she used to grow some weed plants not to smoke, but because in one of them the sort of remedies that Mexicans have is to put some of the marijuana leaves in alcohol, and you shake it together and you let it sit for a while, and then if you have any sore joints, you just apply it on your joints. There's so many different like what's the word I want to say, like witch doctor kind of like concoctions that people come up with, where it's like, yeah, that's very much like part of Mexican society as well.
That is true, and I guess yeah, my
yeah, and then for every Mexican knows about vapor rub. I am convinced of that. Every time you get vapor rub, vapor rub.
I was gonna say I was thinking of Vicks, but the
yeah, Vicks vapor rub. That's what it is.
Oh my god, dude. I was gonna mention it. Like, my grandparents are a bit like probably a little.
Oh yeah, they'll lather you up with. When you're sick as a kid, you're lathered up in Vicks.
Yeah, like even though I didn't get as much the witch doctor stuff because I think my grandparents were born a little bit like they're a bit younger than yours were.
Oh no, like my mom was telling me because
Vicks all the time, dude. Like you cough a little bit, it's Vicks, and then like always I have like hot soup, and then like all this other like it's and then
they do like weird things. Even my dad, like he's not quite of that generation, but even he like because it's some of these traditions that get passed on in the Indian mentality. So like to prevent me like when I was like born from having like there was something that they believed they had to do to prevent you from having like to make sure you don't have like an outward protruding belly button versus an inward one. Like it was some, I don't even remember what it was, but I was like, I remember hearing this. I was like, are you serious?
This is funny, yeah. But yeah, the Vicks thing was yeah, that's so popular. Like
Vicks, man, yeah. I'm convinced I'm sure Mexicans are probably 50% of their purchasing market.
It has to be, dude. I mean, it was like again, you were just anything sick, and it was like I
dude, it's Vicks, man. That's the cure.
Here, rubbed in the bag. I was just like, how much more do I need?
Yeah, so that scene like cracked me up. Oh, like this is true. I was like, some things haven't quite changed.
Just like yeah, because like they'll listen to the doctors. Like my grandpa will do that, but then she'll be like, "You need to drink like 4 Ensures." I'm like, do I really have to?
It's like not scientifically backed. It's just like this is just what's the belief. Yeah, where they heard someone say that, and then all of a sudden it sticks.
Oh, 100%, dude. It's like, yeah, I need to, are you taking enough of these like vitamins and this? I was like, okay, like I don't know. It's too much, but yeah, it's definitely a different.
Yeah, I don't know. For me personally, that was one of my favorite scenes. Just the clash of the doctor and the the witch doctor there, if you will.
My
what do they call her? The bone lady too. That cracked me up.
No, the scenes that really got me chuckling was any scene with like the Virgin Mary. I was
like, yeah. So yeah, we can get to that scene before we get to the priest. But yeah, at one point, everything's sort of gone wrong. Her fiance is in jail. And she's just mad because she's done everything right. And, she feels like God's against her. So then she goes, she's in the church being consoled by the priest. But then she just looks up at the statue of the Virgin Mary and just starts lambasting the Mary, just being like, how could you let this happen? I haven't done anything. Like, I've been good. I've done like things the right way. And yet all this keeps happening. And she's like, you're just like, she's like, do it as mala or something like that. And I was just like laughing. I was like, yeah. I've seen family members do stuff like that.
No, and there's also the scene where before he steals or takes the malaria medicine, like he asked for blessing for the Virgin. Like they have a smaller set, which is like,
yeah.
So, but no, even when in the house in Mexico that like I got to visit in the summers, Yeah, there's also a painting of the like.
Oh, La Virgen is big, man.
If you don't have a painting, like they start snickering and there's gossip around your town.
Are you kidding? I have like a rosary over there from Mexico too. Yeah.
So it's huge, right? It's like one time I made the mistake in saying like, oh, like if there's too much deification and like, you know, I don't.
Was it to who? To your abuelita?
No, to my
Or
mom.
to your mom?
And I said like, oh, like, you know, like I have this thing and people always ask me like, what do I have this for? And I go like, yeah, it's like so like, you know, I have to put it up, right? I don't want to put it like I've been told if I put it like not like, you know, in a drawer, I'm gonna get like cursed. And then my mom was like, that's so disrespectful, you know. It's there and it's there for a purpose. I was like, okay, fine. But if you when you press them, they will admit that maybe there is an over exaggerated.
Of course there is. So like, I mean, my dad has like elements of that, but even he is like, you know, relenting. But my abuelita though, no, there were whenever we'd go to her house, man, there were pictures of La Virgen everywhere, like probably in every room. That might be a bit of an over exaggeration, but it was close. Like there was a lot.
Yeah, only thing I'd say is that like you need to have one, or else you're not getting the brownie points. Because like I remember I moved to New Jersey, and within like the first 3 months, I was asked like, "Oh, you didn't get one yet? Why aren't you getting one?" I was like, because I don't want to spend money, and I don't think I need one." And then immediately,
oh no, then your house is cursed, Chris.
The next 2 weeks, I got one in the mail. I was like, okay. I was
and
like,
you got a call saying to put that up, right?
Yeah, and then it was like it's been blessed, and like you just can't be damaged. If it's damaged,
That's right.
we're going to be so pissed. And I was like, okay, so no, it's still in my room. So and yeah, it's probably staying. I'm telling you, we're gonna be like, they always ask like, man, because when it gives off,
they didn't realize you were that much of a devout Catholic.
No. So what it gives off is that like it's So I do my little tangent here is that yes, I comes across as I'm such a devout Catholic, but anybody who knows me knows that I've rejected many things of the church now, and I don't really associate. But I will say that like there's an element of being culturally Catholic, and that's part of that.
Yeah, so the cultural aspect of the religion is crazy, and that's something that most people don't let go, even if you let go of the religious aspect.
Exactly. Like I honestly, as I got older, I see that like even though I might disassociate with the church and its corruption and its covering up,
I think the cultural aspect is kind of beautiful though, because it brings a community together.
The culture thing is strong because I will admit that like I'm probably culturally Catholic. It's like it's not even like I don't even think about it. I thought about it. I was watching this movie. I was like, yeah, I don't like agree with a lot of the church doctrine anymore. I don't agree with how they manipulate money and
and they have a Vatican bank.
Yeah, and like and they need donations, but I've been to the Vatican and all I see is gold everywhere. And then it's a shame because I see them sell these rosaries and it's like, oh, it's been blessed by the Archbishop here. It's like, but you're charging $500 for this. Like, this is like, what happened to?
Bro, when we went to Italy years ago when I was a kid, like my family, they're like, oh yeah, we got to buy a rosary from the Vatican. It doesn't matter that it's like $200.
This is what I find interesting, how juxtaposed the logic is that like I know that like most of my family agrees with this, but when I brought back that stuff for my family members, everybody was fighting for it. So it was like, so they agreed like, oh, this is silver price, but no, I want one. Why didn't you get me another one? I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Am I supposed to bring like the whole gift store here? Like, like I didn't know. Like even my mom was like, oh yeah, I still have that. It's that's it's important. I was just like, but we agree that like it's not worth $200. Like it's like, let's.
They don't care. It doesn't matter. It was there with the Pope, man.
It was within 200, like it's within the same radius of the Pope. So of course it's like, and also this Pope.
As you get closer and closer, like the amount of pure, I guess the elevated purity of the rosary is greater the closer the circumference.
Exactly.
Pope.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how I'm going to phrase that.
Yeah. If you get I'm telling you, if you even get one that's blessed by like the Pope,
or if it was touched by his hands, yeah.
Yeah, you're good luck with your arm because it's gonna be ripped off. So it's just crazy. Yes, it's a strong, very strong cult, and you see this through the film. So connecting it back to the movie, yes, there's scenes with the Virgin, but also you see how like no matter if it's the main characters, whether it's the town or even the business guy, the Don, what's his name again?
You're talking about Don Damian.
Don Damian, the store owner, right? They all respect the priest's word, right? That's something I picked up in the movies, that like he said something and everybody was just
that was it. No, he was the ultimate authority, basically.
Yeah, like bigger than government, bigger than wealth. He was the ultimate authority. I think again they're touching upon something that I still think there's an aspect today that
it's not quite as strong. For a while, I believe one of the I think for a while, like one of the I think it's since been repressed, but right after the revolution, for a while, because the priests would go over with their traditional like black collar with the white I forgot what exactly you call it. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, it's this thing, right?
Yeah. They would in the traditional like priest robe they would walk around, but that was banned in public for a while, and I think it's since been like repealed. But yeah, and so that's why like because it was such a symbol of like authority there.
Yeah, all I know is that if they ever want Mexico to go full on upgrade their level of devotion, just have a Mexican pope, and I don't know if I could even visit. Like it'd be so crazy. There'd be so zealotry, dude. Could you imagine a Mexican?
No.
Let's
not imagine that.
And then visit, like actually, like do a tour. I mean, you might as well tell me Jesus was reincarnated.
No.
It's like it would be crazy.
They go nuts, dude.
But yes, anyways, going back to like the specific scenes and the priest. I will say that like I do think this film takes a perspective of, I don't know if this was intentional, but or maybe they didn't feel comfortable maybe doing more of a critique. Because you do see in this film like the priest is basically, if you didn't know any better, like you would think he was like one of the good characters in this movie, but we know like the real context is that like they are like maybe the individual priests on the ground, but
so he is right. I would say his character is. I was like, but if you're trying to like extrapolate that and make it like as he's a representation of all priests, I was like, that is totally wrong. And I don't know if I've told you this before, but like, so like my grandparents from Mexico, obviously they were Catholic. They like it's to the part where you don't really question because you don't really know anything else, right? Especially in that time in the 20s, 30s, 40s, no one really knew about any other religion in Mexico at that time. But and so my grandfather would raise, because it's very agricultural, like we talked about. He would raise cattle and like and he owned a little bit of land, so he would grow certain agricultural products. I don't know what exactly like what vegetables he was growing, but at one point I remember hearing the story, and he kind of turned away from the church a little bit, which is wild to do like in that society. And it's not that he like completely like he didn't go full reverse, but he just kind of like shunned it and stayed away for a bit, because you start to see some of the ugly habits of the church and how much power they had. Was at one point he was walking his cattle like across one of his like baby calf across town, and as the priest was walking by, and he's like, "Hey," he's like, "that's a really nice cow." He's like, "That's the church's cow now. You need to like offer it." And just like that, like it wasn't even like a request; it was like a demand. And my like, I remember like my grandpa told me, I kind of looked back, and he's like, this is ridiculous. He's like, and he didn't give it to him, but that really like irritated him. Just sort of the yeah, it was it was entitlement. He's like, yeah, that's no longer your cow. You need to like give it to the church. And so that's a lot. Like it was not a very rich. What also turned him off is like it's not a very rich community where my grandpa's hometown. He's like every like offering. He's like you need to be giving to the church. You're like demanding what little like a lot of the poor had there. He's like that really turned him off as well.
Yeah, and connecting it actually to the mission that we saw earlier in our podcast, right? Like there's that line in that movie where I forgot what the characters, but like the priest, Jeremy Irons' characters critiqued a little bit, saying like, yes, you're teaching them to read, you're giving them like like a structure, but they're working the land for basically free, and you're taking the profits. Like it's like you're getting, it's a trade, right? You're giving them something, but you're also taking something from them, and it's
taking a lot more.
Yeah, and it's like that's a good little short story that you share there, because like I think it shows a lot that like in Mexico it was a very similar deal where the church had such authority that it was, they kind of picked what they wanted.
Whatever they want. It was a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, and then like you said, like they were part of the power
They're
structure
huge landowners, dude.
and big landowners, and again that boiled up, right? It simmered and became a war because like you have people working really hard, and they're religious too, but they're also like, again, I always say to, like, when people think like people are dumb, like they may not like be like super elite, but like they also have intuition of like, hey, I'm working really hard, and like now you're telling me like I I have to give this up, or I have to take a back seat because you say so, or you're the true masters of our area. Like that was always gonna blow over time. Like it was gonna explode anyways. But
Hmm.
yeah. But yes, I think we do see, like, in this, even in this movie, where who has the, like, you can see how characters talk to each other or like to above them, like who has the respect and who has, like, the upper standing in society. And it's a powerful, like, it's a bit of a caste system in many ways. So.
Yeah, I agree. Um, is there anything else you want to touch upon? I'm trying to like think back. I guess something we didn't really address. It's like I think society's definitely evolved here and in Mexico over the years. Yet some things are still the same. But one thing that I just like shocked me, because we don't really hold this view here. I'm not even sure in Mexico that they so much hold it anymore. But it's like holding accountable the sins of your parents. It's like that's something that the main character definitely suffers from. But it's fascinating. It's like, man, she hasn't done anything, but she just happens to be, an out of wedlock birth from someone who, had sex for a living, and she was punished for that like eternally.
Yeah, I don't think it, this is complicated because I don't think I didn't grow up in Mexico, so I can't say like it's gone away. But I will say from my own experience is like, if you have like dark history or black sheep, there's a reason why it's really repressed. And the
Hmm.
reason I think it's
They don't
really
like to talk about a lot of things within certain family structures. I will
yeah,
say that.
I think the reason it's really repressed is partly shame, but also partly like, you know, um, I have to like say this without saying the actual details because I don't want to get in trouble.
Go ahead.
but like, the context of what I'll say is that like I have seen people take certain actions merely because they didn't want that to spread to extended family or even friends.
Hmm.
I think that stems from the same origin of like, I don't want to pass on like, baggage to like that
Sure, and have that
same.
be held over their head.
Exactly, because I've been, as a kid, I've seen it when I was like younger, when I interacted more in Mexico, that like people will just hold it against, you know other people, like even like marriages, like, oh, you're why are you criticizing me? My mother was never a, whatever, I'm not gonna say the word whore, but like a stealing or whatever, and it's used sometimes as daggers, and I think like
Digs,
to
yeah, it's like personal attacks.
yeah, I don't think it's like, I don't know what Mexican society was back then. I don't like, to
Well,
your point. I
I'll
don't think
tell
it's
you.
like,
Go ahead.
I don't
I'll
think
let you
I don't yeah. Let me just finish my thought real quick.
finish.
I don't think it's like as dramatic as we saw in this film, where like it's really held against her, always in her face. She can't like eat and do trade without
It's
being
not to the
held over.
point where you're just isolated.
But I do think that's still kind of is still like that remnants is still in modern society, because I kind of seen kind of like similar stuff where certain back, like, you have nothing to do with it, like it's your great grandparents or whatever. It's like, oh, that's why that kid, like they always say like little lines. You probably heard it too, like, oh, the reason they're like this is because, yeah, their grandfather was like, womanizer or whatever. It's like
Oh yeah, a lot of
it,
baggage comes out.
so I think the baggage is there still. I just, to your point, I don't know if it's like exactly
I don't
like
think it's well. So
Maria,
that's what I
like,
was trying to say. Like another story. It's like I can't remember if like who I heard this from, whether it was my dad or grandpa or like uncles, but there's this. They were talking about, because especially once you get some of the older generation all talking and reminiscing about certain things that happened in the past, then stories get brought up. But I remember hearing one time that they were talking about this woman who showed up in like my dad's hometown. It was like 2 or 3 thousand. I think it was probably around the time he was born, which is in the 50s. So just to give you some context, but yeah, this woman and her daughter just like moved to this town out of nowhere, and at that point in the 50s, it's hard to get to this town,
mm,
and you wouldn't know. But yeah, she like moved in. No one really knew her backstory, but I think it either came out or they had a huge suspicion that she basically, wherever this woman was from and her child, that it was either out of wedlock or she was happened to be like a prostitute at one point and just needed to leave her town and move, basically start a new life kind of deal. Do what like Maria Candelaria basically didn't do in this film, which was, move with her husband somewhere away. And so like that, yeah, it was, I think it's, I don't know if it's quite, the stigma's still there today, but I don't know if it's quite to the extent of being completely 100% like you're out of here.
Yeah, I think there's been changes, right? I mean, obviously
Yeah.
society evolved, but I what I wanted to stipulate was that definitely I don't think it's completely gone away because
No.
look,
It'll
I
never fully go away.
heard from my older relatives like, no, there's things that even like because maybe they were involved in or did they're like, oh, I'm dying with these secrets. Like I'm not like because I think if it
Yeah.
wasn't for the culture being maybe gossipy, I think a lot of secrets would have died a long
But
time.
but that's anywhere, dude.
Like they want to die. That's true. That's anywhere, but
It's even here. There's some. I'm sure there's people with secrets like, no, I'm going with the grave with that or something.
exactly. So I think in this film, specifically this film, yes, I do agree that I don't think it's like that like blatant, but I think there's elements that still exist, and you still see it, especially at family gatherings or people when they let their guard down, maybe they chit chat, and because it's surprisingly sometimes to me, and I know you've experienced the same, where like you have this perception of maybe some, especially when you're younger, more naive, and then you get more of an off guard moment, and you're like, wow, this is like pretty vicious to some of the things that you kind of think or believe on your somebody who's like in your family tree. It's like oof, like yeah, there's a lot of like peels, onions to those layers of onion there.
It's
Like
layered, bro. It's like any society's layered.
exactly. I don't know. America's easy, dude. The law of the gun. I always say.
Oh, sure it is, bud.
The cowboy represents America in my heart.
No, it's layered here. People still don't understand Wall Street bets. But then I'll leave it at that.
Okay, that's a more modern thing. I'm talking about the soul of America. But no, other than that, I can't think of anything else. I was gonna bring up that whole like kind of like generational, the sins of your ancestors affecting you, and I think again, I think it's still in some degree held against you depending on your family tree. Because there is that idea always, and it's in America, like any culture too, but there's that idea of like good stock and bad stock, right? And it is like because I want to be honest with you, like when you were talking earlier, it triggered in my brain that like I should ask like my own parents, like if my future fiance, her mother was let's say somebody who worked in Las Vegas. I'm actually kind of curious to see the answer to that. I don't know, so sure it'll be such embraced.
No, probably not. Yeah, no.
There's strong cultural stigmas because it's still like that's the thing too. Like you always bring this up. That's a really good point. Always like in our other conversations that people always think that like conservative is always the same thing in America as in like another country, but like
no, it's different.
My own mom would be considered liberal, like in Mexico, and here conservative in many social issues. It's like it's like people forget that when people immigrate, like they just think they're like, oh, they're like us. It's like no, they have their own like their own culture and background that it might not align with your spectrum.
People just don't understand. Yeah, I mean, but the more and more you travel, the more you realize like how, like how nuanced a lot of this stuff is.
Yeah. I'm cool with getting into ratings. You have any other topics, but
I think we're good. I think we covered most of like the film, most of the characters, and I would say like a lot of the themes that they were, I think, trying to address and how self-reflective it is. So I'll let you go first since I'm the one who picked it.
Okay. Yeah. So this film, I thought the acting was good for the time and the talent too. Like obviously it wasn't like you have to remember that like this is also before like again acting schools got huge outside of like LA because like now there's more ability to get training and practice. The script writing, like I said, it's a movie in time, right? But I think where I think the beauty of the movie is again is if you have like it's like one of those payoffs, right? If you have like the context, the movie's huge payoff. If I'm just like a casual, this movie is no payoff, and I can see why it has some lower ratings. But for me personally, because it has huge payoffs, and like it's a movie that it's like the story isn't so complicated where like you could just watch this like on your kind of like downtime or like in the background, even if you want to do a rewatch. I think the rewatchability is actually higher than people think if you can get over some of the stylistic choices. But that payoff is what I really liked about the movie. Like it's not often maybe because again we don't watch all Mexican films all the time. But there was a lot of scenes where I was just like, oh, this is like, it just clicks, you know?
It's relatable too.
Exactly. So I coming in at 8.5, so 8.5 out of 10. You know, it's one of my higher grades. So, but I will stipulate that, like, I will say this: if I didn't have as much of a context, I could see myself giving this movie a 7. But because I get that extra boost, I can't give it anything lower than 8.5. So
Yeah, so I will just preface by saying we do have a certain amount of like bias having family that's both of us having family from Mexico, and so like I don't know if someone who doesn't really know anybody, like doesn't know some of the cultural nuances, I don't know if they get quite as much out of it, even though like you can understand it. It's just it's more like personal to us. I would I guess put it, but I
you're
really
not gonna.
liked how.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
I was
I'll
gonna
let
say,
you go.
you're not gonna get the payoff, right? So like if I was kind of like saying like maybe as a like being a true purist and like the the critique the structure and the script and stuff, yeah, I would say like 6.5, 7. But I mean, I'm not gonna give it that score. I mean, I agree with your point that like you might not get the same payoff if like you just if you watch a lot of movies and you watch a lot of that like 40s like French, Italian, and American, like you might not just you might just be like, oh, it's a solid. I see your point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so sort of with that in mind, and I would say I really like the fact that this film was very simple in sort of its plot line, and yet even within the simplicity, it was like incredibly layered. I really liked a lot of the choices they sort of took to in terms of like the casting. I liked how they had basically it wasn't just like your typical Europeans, but you had like complex characters. Sort of the upper class. You also had the mestizos, and then you had your specifically the indigenous people. So it was all of sort of the racial spectrum there, uh, and it really led to like a much deeper sort of critique of Mexican society at that point. So for me personally, I would give it a 9. I thought this was great if you understand some of the cultural nuances, as well as sort of the time period and what was really going on at that point in time in Mexico. What I really couldn't give it anything higher, like a 9.5 or a 10, was because there were a couple things where I'm like, yeah, a lot of effects have gotten better, but even like super sanding that's the term I would use because he basically just blew like a TNT bomb the jail door open and just beat 2 guards to like end it. I was like, this is like you go through all this film and then this is how you're gonna choose to end that scene. It was a little too unbelievable, and so that's why I couldn't give it higher than that.
Yeah, to your point, it's not the special effect. It's the issue
No, how they
that's a
chose to
plot.
do that, it was
It's a plot hole.
unbelievable.
It's a plot hole.
Yeah,
Like that doesn't even make sense. Like
yeah,
like like what? Now the guy is made out of like titanium. Like
yeah.
um yeah. Go
But
ahead. Sorry.
yeah, anyway, so that's I guess where I would end it. It was like, yeah, I would give it a 9.
Yeah,
But yeah, is there anything else that you want to touch upon?
no, I think our scores. I think there is like again, it's a good thing we prefer. Like we did a disclaimer where I think the scores is we want to emphasize that it's a cultural payoff too, because like I said,
Hmm.
if you're just chiming in and if you're like let's say an NYU student that just likes film,
Oh,
there's
you
things that
yeah.
you can get out of this like structure and some stuff, but like unless you like know like a lot of those intricacies, or even like or if you're a historian, you know a lot about the Mexican Revolution, you probably will get the payoff. But other than that, like I can see a lot of people going like you know, oh, this movie is like overrated because it did win an award, right? I think it did win like an official award. So I know this movie will come up in some people's lists, and I can see people like glossing over it because like I think this movie is made for a specific audience. But I think that's sometimes the most rewarding aspect of a movie where it is made for specific people versus like um a more generalized film. I mean, I guess there's also films that are really good that are general enough to be cross culture, but I think this one isn't as cross culture at
Mhm.
times.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, if you don't have anything else to add, I think that's pretty much it. We can end it here.
All right, we're gonna do the like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe and
Yeah,
listen.
so if you liked our commentary on this, but both our commentary on the film and I guess commentary around the time period of Mexico as well, please like and subscribe to our channel and stay tuned next week where we will be reviewing what's the name of the film, Chris?
Sound of Metal.
The Sound
I'll,
of
I'll,
Metal.
Also, this particular episode, I didn't notice we have a second subscriber. So shout out to our 2 subscribers.
Whoa! Shout out. We'll put in some plugs in the future too.
Yeah, until if we ever get too big, then I can't do it. But
we might. Who knows, Chris? We might hit 100 one day.
But yeah, so let's leave it at that. So yes, please listen to the next week's episode. We'll be covering Sound of Metal, which is a very intriguing film too.